and I'm presenting our contribution on the role of cognizance and responsibility. This work is based on Dalla and Cousot's paper, where they try to identify the root cause of a behavior of interest in a program. And before talking about our contribution, it is necessary to understand the state of the art before the responsibility analysis and also the responsibility analysis. So to do so, we present this toy example that it's a simple access control where there are two admins, I1 and I2, that are two administrators that have complete free choice on choosing the inputs they assign to their variables. And all the other variables are completely deterministic. We are interested in see when the value of ACS is positive or negative, because if the value of ACS is strictly positive, we have an access success to a resource. Otherwise, the access fails. This happens, the access success happens when both administrators put a positive value to the variables, otherwise the access fails. The first method from the state of the art that is used to understand who is a responsible entity is dependency analysis. But as you can see, this method fails in determining who is the responsible entity, since all the program is considered responsible. The other methodology is counterfactual causality, that is based on the following principle. An event E is a cause of the occurrence of another event E first, if and only if, were E not to occur, E first would not happen. This methodology succeeds in some example, but as we can see with the inputs I1 that is assigned to 0 and I2 that is assigned to 0, this methodology fails in determining a responsible entity, so it's still too imprecise. Actual cause is method from Halpern and Pearl that is based on the following principle. An event E is an actual cause of another event E first if there exists a contingency such that E first counterfactually depends on E. So this method succeeds in eliminating completely determined inputs like APV that is assigned to 1, a program point at 1, and TYP that is assigned to 1 or 2, that is input settings. But it fails to eliminate other completely determined entities like APV at program points L3 and L5. Also, in determining responsibility, the three methods seen previously misses those 3 points. First of all, temporal ordering of events and actions is not taken into account. Secondly, it is useful to understand which entities are free to make choices, since are the ones who can be responsible for a certain behavior of interest. And lastly, the three methodologies seen before implied an omniscient observer, namely an observer that could see all execution steps in a program. So it could be useful also to analyze an observer that couldn't see all the execution steps in a program. Now we can formalize the responsibility analysis. The first element that's important is the lattice of trace properties, where behavior of interest are modeled as trace properties, defined as set of traces that satisfies the specific criteria. So, for example, the element AF, aka access failure, is the set of traces that satisfies this access failure is mapped to the AF behavior of the lattice. The prediction abstraction is a function that, given a behavior, selects all the prefix traces that guarantees that specific behavior along all its prolongations. So, for example, the first trace that we can see where the first administrator takes a value less than or equal to 0 grants the access failure behavior along all of its prolongations. The inquiry function that is based on the prediction abstractions selects the most concrete behavior that a trace can guarantee among all its prefix traces. So, for example, the first traces that we take into account, so that APV takes a value equal to 1, the only behavior that this prefix trace can guarantee is stop, because I1 and I2 are not yet assigned. On the second trace, where the first administrator takes a value less than or equal to 1, the most concrete behavior that this prefix trace can guarantee is access failure, because we recall that if at least one of the two administrators is assigned to a value less than or equal to 0, the access to a resource fails. The cognizance function is an equivalence relation among the traces, and it models the observer perspective. So, for example, if the observer couldn't see the value of I1, it is said that the cognizance function couldn't see the value of the first administrator. The cognizance function in Deng and Cousot's work satisfies these two assumptions. The first one says that the cognizance of the concatenation of two traces is the cognizance of the first trace concatenated to the cognizance of the second trace. And the second one, that's important for our contribution, says that the cognizance function cannot mix valid and invalid traces. A valid trace is a trace that has a trace in the concrete prefix traces. The observation function given a trace, it maps to the most concrete behavior that the trace can guarantee, taking into account a cognizance function. So, for example, if the cognizance function couldn't see the value of I1, the observation function maps this trace to the behavior of the lattice stop. It is to note that if the cognizance that is taken into account is the one of an omniscient observer, the observation function corresponds to the inquiry function. So the cognizance of an omniscient observer is the identity. Now we can identify a responsible action in a program. How? You can ask yourself, by splitting the trace into three parts. The history, that is in this case is APV equals to 1, that is the history of a trace where the behavior of interest is not granted. The responsible transition, that is an action in a program that grants the behavior of interest, and the future that satisfies our behavior of interest. The responsibility analysis encapsulates the concept of free choice, because the responsible transition is an action that is freely chosen by an entity, because for example, the administrator can freely choose to follow the path where the future of the trace satisfies the behavior of interest. But it can also choose to take another path with another transition, tau r prime, where the behavior of interest is not satisfied. Okay, after formalizing all the responsibility analysis, we asked ourselves, what happens if we allow the cognizance function to mix valid and invalid traces? We discovered that the the previous results on free choice are not valid anymore. So we had to adjust a little the theorem we've seen before. So this is the main contribution that we reached. So for the cognizance of an observer, tau r, that is the action responsible for behavior B, in a valid trace sigma h tau r sigma f, sigma h tau r guarantees the behavior of interest, but there exists another trace sigma first s, such that the sigma first is equal to the cognizance of sigma h, so it's equivalent. And sigma first s, and s is our action responsible for the behavior of interest, does not guarantee the behavior. This new theorem helps us to identify a new notion of cognizance with respect to the observer, and to show that we recall the access control example. Let's analyze what are the actions responsible for our behaviors of interest with an omniscient observer. We can see that for access failure, the entity responsible are I1 that takes a value less than or equal to 0, and I2 that takes a value less than or equal to 0. And for access success, both administrators have a value that is strictly positive, and the last action is responsible for the access success. Now let's try to think about an observer that couldn't see the value of I1. Let's analyze first the Dalla and Cousot observer. If we can't see the value of I1, the only actions that we can see as responsible for a behavior of interest are I2, that takes a value less than or equal to 0. In all other cases, the uncertainty of the input of I1 is spread along all path of the computation, so we couldn't see other entities that are responsible for any behavior of interest. But for our observer, we can see that we find other entities that are responsible for a behavior of interest, since the input of I1 is spread along other variables that are connected to it. Like IPV is assigned to -1, is a new entity that's responsible for the behavior of interest, since it's the first point in the computation where we can see the effects of the assignment of I1. So for an omniscient observer, this entity is not a free choice, but with respect to our new notion of cognizance, it is. Now, someone could ask, how is this new role of cognizance useful in a real case example? Because we had a toy example. So we present now this simple password timing attack, where we have a secret password that's PWD, and a guest password by an attacker. The login fails when the guest password is different from PWD, and the login succeeds when the two passwords are equal. And for an omniscient observer, we can easily know that the responsible action is the guest password when the access fails. But when we don't see the value of PWD, the attacker can know when the iteration of the while loop stops. And also it can understand what is the character that differs from the secret password. So if the attacker tries multiple times to access a system, it can guess also the password, and this decreases the overall security of the system. But if we try to modify the cognizance and we can't see the value of PWD and the value of the iteration variable, the attacker couldn't know what was the iteration that stopped the while loop, so the security of the system increases. Okay, now we have some more work to do on responsibility analysis. First of all, we have to see all the implication of the new contribution that we studied on the abstract responsibility analysis. Secondly, we want to try to express a responsibility analysis as an upper property in order to try to express this as a temporal logic. Thank you for your attention.
So it was her first talk in a conference, so congratulations.
Thank you.
It's also a difficult subject, responsibility, you see, so I expect gentle questions.
Thank you.
I expect questions. Only gentle one, but at least one question.
No, I don't have a question. I have to come up with a question. No, I don't have a question. I don't know.
Want to ask a question?
No,
Okay,
I don't know.
I'll give you.
I can think about it.
We got one. Is it a nice question? Okay.
Okay, so what's the motivation for expressing this in temporal logic? Where do you hope to go from here?
Because if we try to express that technique in temporal logic, we can try to implement it in some way that could be actually useful. So, well, it's just an idea for now. So we have to study that and try to research on it. So it's just an idea for now.
Okay, well, was there a particular tool that you're hoping to use?
Maybe CTL star for hyperproperties and all the tools related to it.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
I can tell you a story on how we got the idea of Cognizance. Assume you are a taxi driver and you take on board a criminal to the place where he's going to do the crime, and is the taxi driver responsible? So our answer was, if he discuss with the guys and we tell him that he will make a crime, he is responsible. But if he says nothing, he doesn't know, so he's not. So that
Okay.
was how Cognizance came in. And so, and also a classical thing is, for example, you have only one action which is responsible. You cannot have multiple responsible. Or can you?
No, you have just one action responsible. That's the first you take into account. So the temporal order of the action is important to determine responsibility.
So that at least one property preserved. And is there any property that you don't preserve? No. That we had? No. You preserve all properties. All theorem remains true with your no definition.
Yes.
Okay.
Those remains true. Just the notion of cognizance changes.
Okay.
And the assumption at A2 is relaxed.
Oh, yes, that's good. So we were too restraining. And I'm not here for question. Gentle one? Okay.
So that one symbol on slide 12, no, I'm just kidding.
I couldn't hear you.
So my real question is, you really investigate what's going on if you start hiding particular variables, right?
Yes.
Did you consider hiding the ordering of operations? Because this seems like quite a similar thing to do, but it would allow you to start modeling multiple people being responsible, right?
Okay, so I did the order of the actions, right?
Yes. So the same way you would hide the values of variables.
Well, responsibility analysis is based on temporal ordering of actions. So hiding that, I think it's not the purpose of responsibility analysis.
I know it's not the way you're doing it, but I wonder if it would be a natural thing to do, because you're already enumerating traces. It would be possible for you to just include traces where you have permutations of your transitions, right? And then I think it would be interesting.
Yes, we haven't thought of that for now, but that's an idea that I should investigate.
You have any other questions? So it was your nice experience, the first one. Next one will be more difficult questions.
Yeah, no.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you.